Shoved an old woman to the floor and laughed as her groceries scattered. The whole mall watched and filmed. When the man in the sharp suit revealed who she was, the boys' smirk froze, and the crowd had to choose what kind of people they wanted to be. The daylight inside Westwood Mall always had a washed-out quality, like a photograph left on the sill too long. On a weekday afternoon, the corridors hummed with the half-interest of shoppers, people with someplace else they needed to be, clutching coffee cups and discount bags. Near the fountain, in front of a row of kiosks selling phone accessories and glossy jewelry, an old woman shuffled slowly, her cane tapping a careful rhythm. Her grocery bag was small and precious. A few apples, a wrapped sandwich, a cluster of oranges, the sort of fragile groceries you buy when you measure every dollar. She moved at the pace of someone who had walked these streets a lifetime. Her name was Eleanor Brooks. Her hair was thin and silver. Her shoulders carried the slow stoop of age. People glanced, then looked away. The mall's traffic is a river and most of us are only passing. A group of teenage boys barreled past her, cell phone screens up, laughter loud enough to cut the hum. At the front of them was Jacob Hayes, 15, lanky, with the casual cruelty of someone testing the edges of what he could get away with. They were high on a private joke. When Jacob shoved through the crowd, his shoulder clipped Eleanor's arm. She stumbled, cane skittering, the grocery bag ripping on impact. Fruit spilled out like little planets, apples rolling, orange halves wobbling away. A cup of coffee toppled and splashed onto the tiled floor. Every camera in the group rose. Phones filmed the scene with excited detachment. "Move faster, Grandma," Jacob said, voice bright with mockery. "Don't block the way." His friends hooped. One of them, Trey, held the phone toward his grin like a trophy. People turned, startled, a woman gasping, a toddler staring. A security guard, finishing his patrol at a jewelry kiosk, strode over. His expression was practiced, half-interested. Most of the shoppers swallowed the urge to speak. It is easier to be polite and keep walking than to step into somebody else's chaos. A few tooted, a few whispered, but no one got between Jacob and his smug victory, not at first. Eleanor crouched slowly to gather her scattered food. Her hands trembled as she picked up an apple, then another. Her hip protested as she bent. The world narrowed to the mechanical business of scooping oranges back into a torn bag. Tears pricked her eyes, not from pain but from the sudden unnecessary indignity. Then, from the other side of the corridor, a figure detached himself from the crowd of shoppers. He moved without hurry, like someone who can afford time. Malik Brooks, impeccably dressed in a navy suit, full beard trimmed, eyes like flint. There was an authority to him that had nothing to do with shoulders. He knelt without hesitation beside Eleanor, lifting the bag, setting fruit gently into his palm. "Are you okay, Ma?" Malik asked softly. Eleanor nodded, voice shaky. "I'm all right, baby. Just old bones." At the sound of the name, the laughter from the teens faltered for a half-second. Their phones still recorded, their eyes widened enough to betray their curiosity. Jacob scoffed. "What's the big deal? She's just old." Malik's hand tightened on an orange, then he stood. "That old woman is my mother." The mall inhaled as one. The words hung and changed everything, tone shifting from the brittle, cruel amusement of a pack to the thin silence that follows the wrong thing said in the wrong room. The guard made a move toward the teens. Jacob rolled his eyes and tried to step away, but Malik's voice dropped, controlled and firm. "Security, take them out. Call their parents. Let them see how their children treat elders." The guard hesitated. Cameras continued to buzz in the teens' hands. Jacob's friends muttered and edged back. The crowd watched. People who would not have been enemies a minute ago but were now witnesses. Some pulled out phones, posting live, delighted by the drama. Others frowned, dismayed. Eleanor touched Malik's sleeve. "Forgive them, son," she whispered. But the woman's kindness landed like a soft coin into a churning sea, and Malik looked at the boy for a long beat, weighing pride against something else. "From today," he said, voice now carrying into the corridor, "my mall will have one rule. If you can't respect people, you can't step inside." A ripple of sound threaded through the shoppers. Some applauded, some scoffed, and a few quietly nodded, moved. Jacob's smirk thinned, replaced by the dawning terror of someone who suddenly realizes that laughter can be recorded, replayed, and judged by a larger world than his friends. The clip that Trey uploaded reached 3,000 views in the time it took the security team to come up with a plan. Cameras in a dozen pockets showed Eleanor seated on a bench, Malik kneeling to help her. Police radios clicked as mall security debated whether to detain the teens or simply ban them. A store manager leaned in, brow furrowed. "We'll press charges if they refuse to apologize on the record," he said, glancing at Malik. Jacob's phone buzzed with a text from his mother before the guard could move. "Where are you?" He stuffed the phone in his back pocket and breathed out, the color draining from his face. Public shame arrives faster now than it did when people wrote letters. It arrives with a ding and a crowd. Malik's eyes took in the recorded faces. The phones pointed like judges' gavels. He was tempted to let the law take its procedural bite, to have apologies recorded, parents notified, school administrators embarrassed. But Eleanor's hand in his stead softened him. "Not like that," she murmured. "Make them see, don't make them crumble." So Malik did something more complicated. He asked the security team to hold the boys at the food court tables, while he spoke to them quietly. The crowd shuffled closer like gulls to something dropped from a boat, but the mall staff respectfully formed a ring. Jacob sat nowhere near as cocky now. His laugh had dissolved into a red flush. He looked smaller suddenly, in the wide chair. Malik sat across from him and folded his hands. "I'm not some stranger who's looking to punish you for clicks," he said, "but you need to understand what you did. You stole a moment of dignity from someone who doesn't have the luxury of wasting it. You filmed it and made a joke of it. That's not a prank. That's harm." Trey fidgeted, trying to deflect. "It was just fun. We were messing around. Old people are slow, dude." The phrase was casual in the way of an insult repeated until it becomes normalized. "You feel strong when you're part of a pack," Malik said, voice low, "but strength without responsibility is cowardice." He paused, letting the words sink in. The boys shifted, uncomfortable in the worldly quiet, as if the wall of the mall had become a classroom. Malik pulled his phone out and scrolled the video. He pointed to the faces, to the way the phone lens had captured a vulnerable human being as content. "Do you know her name?" he asked. No one answered. "Do you know what she feels? Do you know that she fixed other people's meals, wiped other people's counters, raised a son she sent to college? Do you know she taught him to be kind?" Silence. The force of the moment were not punitive alone. Malik told them about Eleanor's life in small luminous strokes. A widow who baked bread for neighbors. A retired teacher who had scribbled blue pen notes into the margins of her students' essays. He told them that she'd been the reason many kids in the neighborhood didn't sleep hungry when times were tough. Jacob's face glimmered with confusion. I didn't know," he confessed. "I didn't think." Malik surprised everyone then. "Good," he said, "then learn." He negotiated a consequence that wasn't just a recorded apology. The boys would spend weekends volunteering at the senior center. They would document, on camera if they wanted, their time. Real work, not snide reels. They would meet Eleanor 3 times, under supervision, to listen. Malik believed in a restorative path, rather than a spectacle of shame. The crowd's feeling shifted. Some shoppers murmured their approval. The mall manager actually smiled. Others grumbled about leniency. Online, the clip gained traction with mixed commentary. Good to see consequences versus cancel culture gone soft. But the real change came in the quiet hours after the posted clip. Neighbors who had seen the live video came forward offering grocery bags to Eleanor, and a local church called to ask how they could help. A wave of care slid in behind Malik's decisive voice. Jacob's mother arrived, cheeks flushed and tearful. She had the furious tiredness of parents who suddenly know the scale of their child's meanness. There were apologies from her mouth that came out more like questions. "How did I not raise you better?" Jacob hugged her, ashamed and small, the public ignominy breaking something open. That evening, Malik and Eleanor walked home slowly past the strip of shops that had once been bustling with a different kind of life. "You should have let them go to jail, son," Eleanor said quietly, rubbing her palms together to warm them. "They need to feel consequences." Malik paused, looking at her. "They did feel one, Ma. They felt you." He smiled in a way that meant both gratitude and resolve. "And they're going to feel a lot more than shame. They'll do the work." Eleanor thought for a moment. "We must be careful, Malik. When you put people on a stage, sometimes you make monsters of them. Let's teach them humanity, not hunger for spectacle." They were walking into a complex future, a public that could amplify cruelty but also compassion. The mall had been the scene of an ugly moment, but now it was becoming a classroom, impatient and hopeful. Chapter 3. Jacob's life before the shove was not a tidy explanation for bad behavior, but it gave context. His mother, Rachel, worked double shifts at the diner, worn thinner by bills that never seemed to stop. His father had left when he was small. Jacob's fatherlessness was a background hum in his life, a missing voice in the applause of sports games, an absent hand at his childish birthdays. He learned to seek respect through bravado because respect had been scarce. At the senior center, Jacob joined a group of teenagers who feared boredom more than pity. Cleaning tables, stacking chairs, carrying meals. He found the work monotonous, until he met Mrs. Alvarez, who taught Spanish songs while folding napkins, and Mr. Kim, who told him how the neighborhood used to host kids' parades on summer evenings. The teens were awkward in the first hour, fumbling with placemats and forgetting to wipe under the trays. They filmed themselves, initially, as if to turn this into content. But as the pile of sandwiches emptied and the conversation warmed, the phones stayed in pockets. Eleanor's presence at the center was unassuming. She sat 2 rows away from the teens, knitting steady garters as she watched them. Jacob kept catching her eyes and quickly looking away, each glance a small sting. One afternoon, during an arts and letters workshop, Eleanor called him by name for the first time, not in reproach but in invitation. "You remind me of my Alan when he was your age," she said, voice soft. "He used to steal limes from my tree." He had a laugh like the street itself, but he learned that his hands did better when they were used to lift, not push. Jacob listened. He realized slowly that the sound of his laugh, the one that had once made heads turn with envy, now made him feel hollow. A teenager whose sense of power relied on other people's smallness was learning the geography of humility. At home, Jacob's mother watched the videos and felt hot shame burn through her. She didn't know if her son would be ostracized in school, but she knew what she needed to do. She signed him up for counseling and drove him to community service on the weekend, hands trembling on the steering wheel. The car smelled of takeout and bleach and the last of the day's laundry. Jacob didn't argue. The morality play of public disgrace had already damped his will to fight. One Saturday, after a long morning helping elders arrange patio flower pots, Jacob found a moment alone with Eleanor. He stopped by the bench where she sat, hands dabbed with soil. "I'm sorry," he managed. She smiled without grandness. "You're learning. That's the important part." She produced a small apple she had set aside, then handed it to him. "Take this home to your ma. Tell her I said not to give up on you." That small apple felt heavier than any phone in Jacob's pocket. To receive not only forgiveness, but instruction was a strange lottery. He walked home with it, as if carrying some fragile new prize. The people around him had the same grudging wonder. A public spectacle had pushed a private pivot. Months later, the clip of the shove remained on the feeds, but it had changed its chorus. Some used it as a cautionary narrative about empathy, others as a call for community programs. But in Jacob's school, in small, less visible ways, the story became about repair. Teachers who had once shrugged at group bullying now assigned restorative tasks. Students who had laughed found themselves in the awkward position of apologizing in person. Malik's approach had begun to ripple. He convened a small meeting with the mall's management, local nonprofits, and school officials. Together they launched a pilot program, Respect in Motion, workshops at the mall twice monthly where teens were invited to volunteer, but also to sit in panels with seniors and listen. Malik funded it quietly, not for credit, but because he believed in civic muscle. The program emphasized listening sessions, not theatrics, and it was intentional about representation. Elders from all backgrounds, teenagers who had made mistakes, parents and counselors. Eleanor became the program's gentle voice. She would say, during a talk one evening, "We have to teach our children what dignity feels like, not by yelling, but by showing. If you teach a child to lift a box for someone else, he will learn the shape of a good hand." The boy who shoved was still the boy who shoved. He was not suddenly transformed into a saint. But where the shove used to be his whole identity, it was now part of a longer arc. He learned dishwashing, he learned names, and slowly, his friends' feeds began to show different content. Videos of them stacking chairs and listening, posts captioned, "Spent the morning at the senior center. Learned more than I thought." Social media, once a tool of cruelty, was starting to reflect labor. Chapter 4. A year later, Westwood Mall felt different. Not because the architecture had changed, the storefronts gleamed in the same way, but because the people who crossed its floors walked with a more deliberate gait. Respect signage appeared at entrances not as threats but as invitations. "We remember, kindness is required here." Malik and local leaders had negotiated a code of conduct, respectful behavior, restorative opportunities, and a quiet commitment to prioritize dignity when disputes arose. Eleanor watched all of this with a reserved amusement. People came to her for tea and conversation. Jacob often lingered by the bakery counter to tell her about his classes. His mother, Rachel, once almost invisible in the audience, began volunteering in the afternoons at the same center where she had signed a document promising to change the narrative for her son. One brisk morning, Malik arranged a small event in the mall's community room. A ribbon cutting, for the formal launch of the Respect in Motion Permanent Initiative. Banners hung, but the real impression was made by the people, Teenagers and elders hand in hand, social workers nearby, parents who had once scowled in the corridor, now nodding toward the stage. Jacob was there, older by a year and quieter. He went up when his name was called and spoke with a confidence that was not performance. "I used to think power was about being loud," he said. "Now I know power is making space for others." A ripple of applause rose, not mocking this time but honest, slow and warm. Eleanor sat in the front row, cane across her lap, eyes bright. Malik caught her glance and squeezed her hand. What had started as a painful incident was now a scaffold for something larger. The journalists asked the sound bites they always ask. Malik gave them one. "We don't stop people from making mistakes, but we do refuse to let mistakes be their destination." The video went online. This time the comments were kinder, with people sharing their own small stories of repair. The mall, once merely a place to pass through, had been made into a stage where a whole community could rehearse better ways of being. That evening, as the sun tilted low and the corridor lights flared, Eleanor and Malik walked home through the quiet streets. They spoke of small things, the taste of a good orange, the way pears feel when ripe. The conversation circled back to the boy who shoved, not as a villain but as a human being in the middle of a messy life. "You turned a shove into a story that teaches," Malik said. Eleanor looked at him, then at the warm windows of the mall behind them. "No, child," she said. "They did that themselves. You only gave them a place to try." Outside, a small group of teenagers laughed at something on a phone, but their laughter was light, not predatory. They paused at the mall entrance and read the sign aloud. "Respect is not earned by how much you take, it is shown by what you give." They nodded and went inside, to work, to buy, to sit, but with a new awareness. This wasn't perfection. There would be bad days. But the bruise of that one shove had become an invitation. Where mocking once seemed cheap and contagious, now the community had learned to ask a better question. How can we make others known? The boy who shoved became remembered, not as a clip, but as a hinge. And in the hush, Eleanor touched Malik's arm. "We did something tonight," she said. He smiled quietly, the sort of smile that holds 1,000 small agreements. "Yes," he said. "We made it harder to be mean, and easier to be brave."